So one of the things that I love about Expedition 33, aside from many other things, is the fact that the story is so open-ended. There's a lot of stuff in the real world that we just don't know about. There's these vague writers and stuff, and how painting works we don't really know. So today we're going to talk about theories on what I think could happen, because I think that's really fun to talk about. So if you guys also want to talk about that, then we'll hop right into stuff that we know, or at least can observe, and then we're going to kind of draw theories from that, and hopefully I can make it all make sense as it goes through my head. Hopefully I can explain it to you. But obviously we don't know much about this world or how anything works, but hopefully this is going to be on track, and maybe they'll come out with something and I'll be right. Who knows? So if you want to get into that, then we will hop right into the stuff we know. Thank you guys always for being here. Let's get into it. So first, let's talk about the things that we know, or at least that we can observe from the game, things we can see, things characters say, stuff like that that we can kind of be a little more concrete about, and then we'll work into the stuff that we don't know. I don't know, I might kind of go into a gray area anyway, just because it's so easy to slip into maybes. But for now, let's stick to kind of what we know, and what we know for sure are that there are painters and there are writers. Now, how these things work, we don't really know too much about, but we do know, or at least can observe, that these painters at least can create little pocket dimensions in things called canvases, and these canvases require a piece of their soul to be interactable and sort of made into something special. I guess first to delve into the maybes is that there are paintings and then there are canvases, and it seems to be the difference between the two is whether or not someone puts a piece of their soul into one, right? That's what separates a painting from an interactable canvas. That's the distinction that I can make without too much delving into theory, but that seems to be the case because we know Mayel has a small painting on the wall, right? She mentions that this is the only painting of hers her mom allowed on the wall, but it doesn't seem to be interactable, and no one actually says Mayel has a canvas. So it seems like they are able to paint, but there is a difference between a painting and a canvas. Second, these canvases, right, with this bit of soul, use chroma in order to create and control the world inside the canvas. However, if a painter or paintress interacts with the painting too long, we know that there is a possibility to have detrimental effects, and the longer you're inside the painting, the more likely you are to, well, die. So if you stay in too long, you're gonna die. That's kind of the whole point of the game. So we know that's for a fact. The first thing that appears a little weird is that time in the painting appears to be different, right? They're in this painting for 67 years, yet it doesn't seem like 67 years has passed on the outside, right? Mayel goes into the painting at 16, and then she is reborn and lives another 16 years in the painting. However, she does not seem to have aged outside the painting, so how time relates, we aren't too sure, but there does appear to be a difference in time experienced in the painting and time outside the painting, but what that is, we aren't too sure. It does appear that non-painters can enter a painting. This one's a little bit of a stretch, but it's mostly because if you continue to talk to Lune through your friendship levels and whatnot, she will say that Mayel has promised to create a canvas inside of the canvas they're currently in and recreate the real world for her to enter and explore. So it does appear that she could, as being a non-painter, go into a canvas even though she has no ability to paint. But that's not 100% confirmed. It just does appear that beings that cannot paint can enter at least canvases to some level. But this does not appear to work the other way, where paintings can leave, right? We saw at the end of the game where Verso hops through the little portal. He gets to that, what I would assume is the little limbo world between real world and the canvas, where Alicia was going to try to repaint herself and then Aileen painted over her, right? There seems to be this little gap between the two where Verso's souls resides, and it seems that when paintings go there, they start to erase so that they don't eke out into the real world. That appears to be the case. Again, not 100% confirmed, but seems like an observable thing. Another things to note, these are, again, a little bit stretches, but I think pretty much, I don't know, pretty fair game for things that we can say we know. Verso has only one canvas, right, even though he is 26, but he appears to have made the painting when he was a child, which I think is kind of odd because everyone's noted to have a ton of paintings, and yet he only has one that he made when he was a young child. This also continues on that it's kind of weird that Mayel is never noted to have a canvas even though she's 16, and Verso clearly made a painting long before 16. We know that Clair is a very good paintress, and we know that Aileen is the best paintress, and Aileen taught Renoir sort of the specifics on how to paint. So we do know that you have to learn to be a painter. How much that delves down to being born a painter or not, we're going to talk about in the theories actually, but there does seem to be some learning involved to becoming a painter. Now we can move on to writers. We don't know much about writers, unfortunately. They're just kind of a little buzzword that the devs throw at us to be like, hey, there's something cool in the real world. But we do know that they used Mayel to attack the Desandre family manor. To what extent, we don't really know too much. We know they started a fire that killed Verso and scarred Mayel. We also know know that Clair is fighting a war against the writers, and that's why she's trying to get her parents out of the painting to help her. How this fight is actually carried out, we don't really know, and for the purposes of this videos and the theories I'm going to talk about, obviously there's a lot more facts, I think, but these are the relevant ones that I thought of as we go into theories, because I want to extrapolate more on this stuff specifically for this video, and I don't know, if something else comes up, then I'll make another one. But yeah, for now, that's the stuff we know, so we can hop into the theories portion of this and really get into fun stuff. So to start off the fantastic theory crafting that is about to happen, we're going to go with how painters and writers work. So painters, we know, use chroma to bring their creations to life, but I think the first thing we can note is that these powers don't appear to extend into the real world. Aileen doesn't repaint Verso after his death. She doesn't appear to have the ability to just create something in the real world. It has to be in a canvas. Same thing with Mael. She doesn't fix her scars. She doesn't have anyone else fix her scars. Clair even tells her, oh, when you go into the painting, repaint yourself so you can talk, right? It doesn't seem like their powers actually affect the real world to some extent. This is also kind of seen with the little creations around the manor. They seem to be little first draft of the Neverons or other creatures that you meet throughout the game in the canvas, but they don't move or come to life, not a single one. It does not seem like they are able to actually make something tangible come to life in the real world. However, the only thing that kind of contradicts this is there are floating objects in the painting room, I guess. Right, there are things floating around. For me, that seems to be a representation of how chaotic and destructive the conflict between Aileen and Renoir actually is becoming, right? There is so much chaos, and the fracture in the canvas has kind of eked out into the world, and that's why we get these floating objects in that room, but in no other room, as far as I saw, was anything actually being manipulated or floating when they shouldn't. This seems to be only in that room near the painting, so it seems like at some level, if it's charged enough, something could happen with the painting maybe. So at some level, this power can eke into the real world and have some effect, but for the most part, it seems self-contained, which leads us to kind of how writers work. We can assume, I mean, I guess this, again, theory, right, that the writers work in a similar fashion. I would assume that they write things called scripts or manuscripts or something like that, where they write words down or maybe even type them on a typewriter with ink, but in some way it involves ink, and they use that as their sort of catalyst to create these scripts that are accessible through a piece of their soul, just like painters, where they can access these stories and kind of go into them in little books or pages or something like that. However, the main problem for me is if they are both self-contained worlds, right? If you have these self-contained canvases and you have these self-contained scripts that doesn't really affect the real world, then what are people really fighting over? What is this war between painters and writers, really about? Two kind of possible. I'm sure there's more possibilities, but there's two main possibilities that I want to talk about here. The first is resources as a possibility, right? There may be this special ink that helps catalyze writers and painters create their works, and that might be running out for whatever reason, or wherever they are, it is going low. I don't know, maybe there's like a trade embargo on this ink from some other country, I have no idea, but there may be an ink shortage, and so these two sort of different groups are fighting over the remaining ink, so they are kind of burning each other down, killing, doing all that, so that they can have more ink to create their worlds for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know if there's some competition for works created going on, but yeah, maybe they just are fiending for ink. I have no idea, but that's one possibility. The second option, which I think connects more dots, is that they're fighting over personnel. So this one might take a bit to explain, but if painters and writers both use ink, then it may not be the ink that's special, it may be the people that are special with an ability to influence the ink with a supernatural energy called chroma. And these people are actually neither painters nor writers until properly trained. Like we said before, Aileen trained Renoir on how to paint. We can assume that they trained Verso and Clair and Mael to some extent, and that's kind of how you decide which one you become, is you have to sort of be specialized in one or the other, or probably born into one. Obviously, the family of painters is going to teach their kid to paint. However, what if one of them is bad at it? This is why I like this theory a lot, is because the other question is why and how did the writers use Mael to attack the manor? And if we take into account that she doesn't seem to have a real canvas, her parents clearly don't think that she's a great painter, right? They only have her one small painting on the wall that she's kind of upset about. She was painted over by Aileen when she tries to go into the painting, and she clearly needed help repainting Ciel and Lune when she finally got her hands on some chroma when she became a paintress again in the canvas. So she doesn't appear to be very good at painting. So it may be the case that the writers targeted her for recruitment and kind of offered her this success, and that she would make her parents proud, or that she didn't need them, she could just be creative and successful here as a writer. And so they kind of brought her into the writer circle, obviously with the intention of attacking the painters. So that would explain kind of how Mayel got tied up with the writers, and how they kind of actually used her to attack the manor by recruiting her and then somehow getting her to let them into the manor. So that's why I like that theory a lot, but I guess we can go even into the more far-fetched realms of theory and just stretching stuff, because it's fun. I really like to do it, but there could also be more than just writers and painters, right? And I would argue that they're the most likely, I guess is the best way to put it, the most likely third category, from what I can tell from the game, would actually be composers. There is a strong affection for music in this game. I mean, the OST is amazing, but not only the soundtrack, but also in the characters, right? Verso is noted to be a skilled piano player. He plays piano for Mayel and Esquier. He also has a scene where his child soul fragment plays in the great concert hall at the end of the game. Also, if you do Mayel's ending, Verso is brought back and is arguably, in my opinion, what I read from it, or what I saw and kind of took from it, is that he's kind of forced to play. But it's regularly noted, there's pianos everywhere, that music is a big part of this game, and clearly a big part of Verso's life. Again, kind of the same thing with Mayel, how she's kind of not a great painter. She might have been targeted by the writers. Verso only has one painting. He's 26. He only has one childhood painting, so he could have been composing and practicing his composition with composers in his spare time and sort of mastering that, while kind of keeping his parents happy by continuing this one canvas. Obviously, the parents have hundreds of canvases, they say, so it's kind of weird that at 26 he only has one. So it's kind of the same thing, that he's probably off doing something else, and if he had joined these composers, this is how he might have got into some sort of trouble with the writers. This may have led the writers to recruit Mayel and try to use her to get into the manor to get back at Verso. This kind of makes Clair's quotes or dialogue kind of even more impactful when she says, you know, Verso traded his life for yours. He might have actually done that, literally, if this is a theory that makes sense, because if they took Mayel under their wing with nefarious intent to sort of kidnap her and hold her hostage, they brought her to the manor and said, hey, Verso, like, we're gonna kill her, and then he literally says, no, take me, and then they make sure that he dies in the fire and try to kill Mayel as well, but because of the swap, Mayel is able to survive. So it could be very literal, actually. You know, this theory in my head makes a lot of sense. So those are the theories I have so far. If you liked any of them, please let me know. I know some of them are a stretch, especially the composer one. There's not a lot of theory behind that one, but again, these things in my head connect a lot of the dots between the very little bits of information we have, especially about writers, but these theories make sense to me. If you have any more of your own because you like the game, if you don't like any of them, I don't know, please let me know down below. Be nice, though. Yeah, just kind of be nice always. I don't know. But have a good one, guys. Let me know what you think. Bye.